All right, Sherry. Also, in my time here in Cullman County, I have noticed that divorce is a fairly common feature. Perhaps not
Yes.
as common as some places I've seen in the country, but it's still prevalent here. And while that's difficult enough for the parents, it strikes me that the children that have to go through a situation like that may be the most impacted with their mental and emotional health. Do you think that's true? And if so, how can you and other health professionals help those kids?
I think it's true that the children suffer. The children that I see in here are often children. One of the biggest issues is adjustment after divorce. The mom's house, dad's house kind of thing. They really need parents to pull together to effectively co parent, but sometimes that doesn't happen. So, I have to help children with coping skills and help them. Sometimes we was mentioning boundaries before, even setting their own little boundaries. Children are not supposed to be the messenger between divorced parents. Children are not supposed to report back to other parents about what's going on with this other parent. Who's daddy dating? Where did mommy go last week? They're supposed to be allowed to be children. And one of the things that I emphasize a lot is children's rights. I have the right to stay a child, not to grow up as a result of this.
Well, what you're saying is really pretty profound, and I don't know that I've thought through it enough. And it makes me think that as the parents go through a divorce, that's their business and their situation. And it seems to me the more they can separate that from the child's life, particularly if they're using the child as an instrument of negotiation or conflict, that's really the first responsibility, is it not? To help make sure the child is not traumatized or really negatively affected? Don't parents have to know not to do that?
It is the first responsibility, but often in the emotions of a divorce, in the emotions of a divorce, I think it's forgotten sometimes. I do meet some parents who effectively co-parent, and they have the interest of their children at heart, when the marriage absolutely would not work out. But often when emotions come into play with that, then it's more about winning battles at that point. And, and really paying enough attention to make sure my child's okay. Can I give and take on this? Do I have to stick to every guideline in the divorce just because that's what's on paper and in the legal document? But can I do what's best for my child? My child wants to spend an extra night with their dad. What is the harm in my child having an extra night with their dad, who they used to live with 24/7?
Yeah. Well, I understand totally what you're saying, and even after the divorce is complete, I see some of the same issues, or at least the essence of those issues, happen sometimes years later for the child.
Yes, and that's true. And they don't have to be a child. I see it in teenagers. I see it in adults. Sometimes it's still like suffering from a divorce that occurred when they were a child. I'll hear people say, this happened when I was 2, this happened when I was 4, and they can even be up to 60 years old and still struggle with a loss, because a loss in a divorce, when a divorce happens, it's a loss like a grief. A loss is like the death of something. It was the death of a marriage. And children were in that marriage too. And, they become teens, they go to college, they later become adults. It impacts a great deal of their life, how that was handled.
Gotcha.
And how they navigated it.
Well, looking around your office, even though it's not on camera here, you have several parts of your office that are set up for children, it looks like, that are under 8 or 9 years old. So obviously you're working with young kids all the way up into senior citizens on this topic. When you have a child in here, regardless of the age, and they're affected by a divorce, what is there one most common theme that runs through all of them, regardless of age, that they're having to deal with? Or is it just so varied that it's hard to say?
Well, it can be varied, but I think the biggest thing with children of divorce is that no matter what happened, the majority of them want their family back together. I've talked to 60-year-olds that still wish their parents were back together. I've talked to people in their 40s that still hold on to some internal fantasy that they could have their family back together.
And so maybe that's where you would be very helpful for them,
Mm-hmm.
is identifying that issue of wanting to put the family together and helping them through it. How would that work? How would that look like if somebody recognized that was still going on with them?
Well, you would have to look at that point, what is realistic and what isn't. If I'm still hanging on to that and that's a major issue for me, but my mom and dad have both remarried and they're happily remarried with who they are, that's not going to happen in my reality. So, developing some coping and grieving through whatever process had occurred back then can be effective. But, sometimes facing the reality of this won't happen and learning to let go and live life.